The forest pressed in on every side, thick with damp air and shadows that clung like a second skin. The wind barely moved, yet the trees creaked as if something unseen leaned its weight against them. Every breath carried the smell of wet earth, moss, and the faint rot of fallen leaves matted together under boots. The cold bit at the edges of the hunter's gloves, not sharp but constant, the kind of chill that seeps deep into the bones and waits. Ethan stopped first. His boot sank into soft mud, and the sound echoed too loudly in the silence. He lifted his head, searching for a direction that no longer existed. "Hold up," he muttered, his voice low, as though speaking louder might stir something in the dark timber around them. Mark came up beside him, his breath ragged, his rifle slung too loosely over his shoulder now. "You see the ridgeline?" he asked, scanning, though his eyes betrayed the truth. He was as lost as Ethan. Behind them, Joel struggled to keep up, his legs stiff from hours of stumbling through brush. None of them had eaten since morning. They'd left camp confident, chasing deer tracks through the frost, certain they knew the land. But confidence doesn't bend the woods. The woods bend men. The silence of being lost is heavier than noise. At first they spoke often, reassuring each other, laughing nervously, but now words felt dangerous, wasted breath in a place that gave back no answers. The crunch of a snapped twig somewhere distant made them freeze, as if the trees themselves had moved. Ethan rubbed at his temple. Hunger already pressed in, but it was the thirst that clawed deeper. Their water bottles were nearly empty, drained faster than expected. Sweat from walking turned cold against their backs when the wind slid down from unseen hills. The afternoon light faded quicker than it should have, sinking low and grey, and with it came the gnawing awareness that night in this place would be brutal. Joel dropped onto a damp log, pulling his cap low. "We're walking circles," he whispered. Mark looked down at his boots, mud-caked and worn. "We'll find a way," he said, but his voice cracked, and the forest swallowed the words without echo. They sat in silence for a long while, each man wrapped in his own thoughts. Faces pale, lips cracked, eyes scanning the trees as if the bark itself might reveal an answer. Ethan pressed his palms together, not yet in prayer, but close. He'd never been the type to lean on faith, not the way his grandmother once told him to, but fear is a language all men understand. Somewhere in the distance a crow called, sharp, lonely, and final. Joel's shoulders trembled as he pulled his jacket tighter. The weight of being unseen, unknown, buried in endless forest made his chest heave. It was then that Ethan thought, not for the first time, about what it would mean to die in a place like this, not with drama, not with violence, but quietly, fading into hunger, thirst, and cold, forgotten by all but the trees. He shook the thought off and forced himself up. "We move," he said firmly. "If we stop now, we're done." Mark and Joel followed, legs heavy, steps dragging. The trees gave no path, no mercy. Every direction looked the same, and yet they walked because stopping meant surrender. Fear and exhaustion marched with them, pressing harder than the packs on their shoulders. The woods did not answer, but the men moved deeper still, and somewhere in the silence of that day, the seed of something greater was planted, though they did not yet know it. For those of you following their journey, this story runs deep into the marrow of fear, hunger, and faith. If you find yourself drawn into the struggle, consider subscribing now so you won't lose the path as their footsteps carry them further into the unknown. As night threatened to fall, Ethan glanced back at the others. He saw in their faces not only fatigue, but the beginning of surrender. And though he could not yet name it, he felt something stir inside him, urging him to hold on just a little longer. They kept moving because movement felt like hope. The hills in this part of West Virginia were folded like fists, every ridge like the last. Mark's compass wobbled. Cloud cover turned the sky into a dull lid. "Downhill," Ethan said. "Water's downhill. We find a creek. We follow it to a road." His voice was rough. He took a swallow and passed the bottle to Joel, who drank and handed it back without meeting eyes. They pushed through laurel. That grabbed sleeves. Branches snapped. Thighs burned. Joel slipped and caught himself on a sapling slick with rain. They found the creek by sound first, a fast whisper in a gully. They slid down on wet leaves and crouched by the trickle, watching it bubble over stones the size of knuckles. "Thank God," Joel breathed. He cupped water to his mouth, then remembered the filter in his pack and fumbled for it. The first clean swallow hit like a new piece of life. Ethan stopped after a few gulps. "Slow," he said. "We need our heads clear." Mark unfolded the wet map, ink lines bleeding. "Logging road," he muttered, tapping a faded mark. "If this is Birch Run, the road should cut north." He looked up, uncertain. The woods did not care about his map. They followed the creek anyway, boots sliding on smooth rock. The air smelled sharp, like iron. Ethan thought of work back home and of Sarah at the kitchen table with their girls' homework. Hunger scraped at them. They split the last of a pack, of jerky. The wind slid along the gully and picked up a chill that bit ears and lips. Rain came quiet and mean. Not a storm, just a thin curtain that found every gap and stole heat. They built a half shelter with branches and a torn poncho. The fire wouldn't take. The moss was too wet. Ethan shaved slivers from the driest stick and cupped his lighter close. It caught for a second, then gutted out as if the forest had breathed on it. "Save the fuel," Mark said. "We can push another hour." The tight world narrowed to boot steps cold, and the creek to their right a thin guide through trees. Twice they saw a straight line that might be road. Twice it was only saplings, a trick of light. Darker now. They stopped under hemlock and sat with backs against rough bark. Joel's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Ethan wrapped his own around Joel's, steadying them. "We're not done," he said. "Hear me? We're not." Up canyon, a smell slid through, like smoke. They stared into the dark. Wind shifted. The smell thinned, then returned stronger. No glow, no crackle, just that smell. "Someone's out here," Joel whispered. "Could be an old chimney drafting back down," Mark said. "Could be nothing." Ethan listened. The creek kept whispering. The rain eased to a mist. He laid his head against the tree. He wasn't praying, not exactly. He was speaking into the quiet, the way a man at the end of himself speaks. "If anyone's there," he thought, "please point us right." He didn't expect an answer. Only a small peace came, like a hand set lightly on a shoulder, enough to say stay. He breathed once, twice, and drifted toward a shallow sleep with the smell of smoke still threading the air, just out of reach. Ethan woke to his own teeth clicking. The rain had eased, but cold soaked everything. Their jackets, the needles under them, the breath that smoked in short bursts. The creek whispered to their right. High in the canopy, a barred owl called once and went quiet. Joel pushed himself up, arms locked too. His ribs. "Can't feel my fingers," he said. Mark checked his watch. The numbers glowed weakly, the battery fading. Then the smell touched them. Smoke. Not the bite of their failed tries, but a settled scent, like a fire that had burned long and gone still. It drifted in, thinned, returned. All three lifted their heads the same way. Ethan flashed his headlamp and killed it to save power. Wet bark, nothing else. "Downstream," he said. He didn't know, but he needed one true line. They moved. The creek widened to slick stones. Joel slipped midstream and soaked a boot. He stood braced and shaking while water seeped in and took from him. Ethan hauled him up. "Keep moving. We move or we freeze." A low bank opened to a flat pocket under hemlock, stamped by feet before. Dark stones ringed a circle of old ash. The smell was stronger. Mark nudged the ash and uncovered a charred nail, black and fragile. "Someone's camp," he said. "Maybe last night." "Try again," Joel whispered. Ethan shaved. Curls from a stick, found a scrap of birch bark and cupped his hands. Flame took, flickered, bent to the damp air. Then, for one stubborn minute, held. They leaned in, eyes wide, palms open to the suggestion of warmth. The fire chattered. Then drizzle sifted through the needles and snuffed it like a breath held too long. Silence. They split a crushed granola bar, each bite heavy and mean. Ethan saw his grandmother's kitchen and the faded print taped near the calendar. A man by a small fire on a beach, hands out as if to bless bread. The memory arrived like a quiet knock. "We stay till first light," Mark said. "Then we follow the creek." They settled against the hemlock, packs as pillows, ponchos shared across shoulders. Wind ran low through branches, a long sigh. Ethan drifted into thin, untrusting sleep. He woke with his heart hammering and the taste of smoke strong in his mouth, though the fire ring was dark. Across the creek, beyond a tangle of alder, a faint orange tremble showed. Low between trunks, not lightning, not dawn. A glow, steady and patient. "Mark," he breathed. "Do you see that?" Mark stared. Joel pushed up on one elbow, his whole body a shiver. The three of them watched the glow hold and breathe, as if someone on the far side had built a fire and then sat down to think. Something moved in Ethan's chest, not fear, not quite. A pull, like a rope thrown gently and drawn with care. The glow didn't grow. It didn't fade. It simply was, quiet in the dark, offering a direction. He told himself it was a hunter with dry tinder. He didn't say the thing on his tongue, that the warmth he felt had less to do with fire and more with being seen. They waited, and the forest waited with them, all of it held in that small, steady orange breath across the water. No one wanted to move first. The glow across the creek held steady, a thumbprint of orange pressed into black. Wind tugged at branches, and the hemlock above them sighed. Ethan felt the pull again, soft but sure, like a line tied to his ribs. "We go," he said, already stepping. "If it's a camp, there's heat." Mark nodded once. Joel swallowed and pushed up, his wet boots squishing with every shift. The creek water burned cold, stones turned underfoot like greased marbles. Ethan planted his boots wide and reached back. Joel took his hand and stumbled, breath hissing between his teeth. Mark came last, rifle held high to keep it dry. By the far bank, alders stitched together like fingers. They shoved through, branches slapping faces, coats catching and tearing with soft pops. The glow brightened as they climbed the bank. Not a bonfire. A small, disciplined circle of flame, no higher than a boot top, cupped by stones. A work of patience. The smell was clean pine sap and a hint of smoke that stuck in throats and felt like food. No tent, no pack, no figure in the dark. Just the fire, steady as a heartbeat. Ethan crouched. Heat licked his cheeks, stung in the best way. He spread his hands to the warmth, rubbed them together, then reached for a stick to tease the coals. The wood was dry, split small, stacked under a slab of rock to keep rain off. He looked up at Mark. "Somebody set this ready." "Maybe stepped out to check a line," Mark said, scanning the tree line. "We should call out." He raised his voice. "Hey there. We're hunters. Got turned around. You close by?" The woods offered nothing back, not even the owl. Joel leaned his face close to the heat and closed his eyes. "Feels like church," he whispered, embarrassed the second it left his mouth. No one answered him, but Ethan knew what he meant. Warmth after cold can feel holy. They warmed fingers and toes, stripping off wet socks, steam lifting into the night. Ethan propped Joel's boot near the stones and turned it now and then to coax the water out. Mark circled the small clearing and came back with 2 flat rocks and an old metal hook wired to a branch. "Somebody cooks here regular," he said. "See the black on that limb?" "Could see be a camp for trail crews," Ethan offered. He wanted a name for this kindness that didn't require belief. They rationed the last of their jerky, letting it soften on tongues. The fire clicked, sap hissed, popped, settled. Ethan's stomach cramped and then loosened in the heat. He felt a weight lift, not all of it, just enough to breathe full again. "Think about the road," Mark said after a while, voice low. "Fire means people. People means access. We follow this bank at first light and keep the key. Creek to our left. Downhill should put us on something." Ethan nodded. The plan felt thin, but thin was better than empty. He added a split stick to the flame and watched it catch along the shaved edge like a fuse. The light threw their shadows long and bent on the trunk behind them, 3 tired shapes leaning toward one small reason to believe in morning. Joel's eyes drooped. "Wake me if someone comes," he murmured, already drifting. He curled near the warm stones with his hands tucked under, his chin like a boy. Mark stretched out with his pack under his head and his rifle against his leg. Ethan sat between them, keeper of the small circle. He let his gaze lift past the fire to the dark. Nothing moved. The forest had settled into the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty but watched, not hunted, watched. He thought of his grandmother's picture again, the man by the small fire, palms turned outward as if warming more than hands. The memory did not demand anything from him. It sat, the way the flame sat, patient and real. Ethan fed one more thin piece of wood to the coals and leaned back against his pack. The heat brushed his face. The creek whispered. Somewhere, far off, a limb cracked and fell. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to rest inside the circle a little while longer. If someone owned this fire, they had left it ready. If no one did, then it was still a gift. He let that thought rest in him, steadying his breath until it matched the small rhythm of flame. When sleep finally came, it was shallow and warm at the edges, as if the night itself had pulled a blanket over 3 men and told them to wait for whatever came next. Dawn showed like a bruise under cloud. The coals held a red breath under ash. Ethan stirred the bed and wanted a simple answer. A trail crew, a hunter passing through, anything but the thought that the fire had been left for them. They split the last food. Crumbs stuck to tongues and were gone. Joel's dried boot bit a raw heel. Downhill. "And north," Mark said. The needle steadied. "Creek to the left." They pushed through alder until the creek riffled around a boulder like a sleeping dog. Ethan marked it and kept moving. The hills opened onto grey stumps. "Cut this year," Mark said at a fresh saw bite. "There's a skid road." Hope rose and fell when they found only deer tracks and a faint trail that climbed and died. By mid-morning, their legs throbbed. When Joel's breath rasped, they stopped for 30 counts and stood again. No speeches, just math with pain. Drizzle ran from Ethan's collar down his spine. He thought of Sarah warming towels and calling him stubborn, in a voice that was love and warning. Near noon, the creek vanished under rock and came out darker. On the far bank, a line ran too straight. "Road," Joel said. They crossed on slick stones. Mark used the rifle like a cane. The line proved an old dozer cut. Ruts led north and vanished into birch. "This goes somewhere," Mark said, and for the first time that day, his voice had weight. They followed, skirting boot-sucking mud. Twice they found bleached flagging tape. Human hands had been here. The cut rose and bent along a shoulder of ridge. Under the creek's talk, Ethan heard something low and far, like a highway under a quilt. Then it went away. Mark slipped on clay, twisted and sat hard. "Ankle," he said. The joint swelled. Ethan looped a belt as a strap, cut a sapling, notched a crutch. Joel took Mark's pack. They moved slower. The cut ended at a fence of blowdowns. Left and right both bled time. Mark looked at Ethan, not the map. "We camp before dark," Ethan said. "Small fire. Dry what we can." They found fur duff under a boulder lip. Ethan shaved slivers, found dry heartwood, coaxed flame. Heat brushed their thighs. Socks steamed on green sticks. Ethan let his eyes close, slid into a narrow, hard rest, and woke into a different kind of seeing. A man sat at the edge of the fire, hands to the warmth. No halo, no robe. A plain jacket, old. Shirt, jeans, brown hair at his collar. A face lined by work. He looked up like you look at someone you've known a long time and haven't seen in years. "I've been waiting," the man said. Ethan didn't start. His breath filled and emptied, the first full breath in days. He knew who sat there. He didn't understand. He didn't need to. The man tipped his chin toward the dark beyond the boulder lip, toward the shoulder of ridge. "When the light goes grey," he said, "turn left, not right." Warmth rolled over Ethan's hands. He blinked and the man was gone, and the fire was only fire, patient and small. Mark stirred. Joel snored once and fell still. Ethan set his palm to the coals and let the heat press in until belief settled. He did not wake them. He sat in the circle and waited for the light to go grey. Ethan woke before dawn, the fire barely a thread of red. He nudged the coals, coaxed enough flame to dry a scrap of bark, then let it fade. The words he'd heard still lived sharp in him. Turn. Left, not right. He hadn't dreamed it. The memory had weight, like a stone in his chest. Mark shifted, ankle stiff and round. "We need to move early," he muttered. Joel rubbed his eyes, still groggy. Neither man asked why Ethan's face looked different, though something in him felt steadier than before. They packed with slow hands. No food left, only water from the creek, metal bottles knocking together in their packs. The sky lightened grey, heavy with low cloud. Wind combed the ridge above. When they reached the fallen trees, Ethan stopped. "Left," he said, certain. Mark frowned at the compass. "North is right." "Left," Ethan repeated. His voice didn't shake. Joel looked between them, torn. Hunger and fatigue made obedience easier than debate. He nodded. "Left." So they turned. The path climbed, narrow and mean, cutting into shale. They leaned into it, hands braced on knees. Mark winced with each push, using his crutch as a lever. Ethan stayed just behind, steadying him when the ankle threatened to buckle. Higher, the air thinned. Pines bent under old storms, roots clinging to rock. Joel cursed under his breath. "Feels like we're climbing nowhere." "Keep on," Ethan said. He felt watched again, not by threat, but by someone who wouldn't let them go. The rope still tied to his ribs. By midday, the slope flattened. A notch in the ridge opened to a view. A valley stretched wide, a grey ribbon cutting through. A road. Joel sagged against a stump, near tears. Mark gripped Ethan's arm. If we'd gone right, he didn't finish. The silence said enough. They sat in the notch, passing the bottle, letting the sight of pavement fill them like food. Trucks far off hummed faintly, proof of life beyond trees. But the way down was brutal, scree that slid under boots, thorn bramble that caught their sleeves, wind that slapped sweat into cold. Mark's ankle slowed them to half pace. Every 50 yards they rested. Hunger gnawed worse now, stomachs folding in on themselves. Joel muttered nonsense to keep moving. Ethan led, eyes always on the ribbon below. The pull hadn't left him. He thought of the man at the fire, of how normal he'd looked. Work-worn, patient, real. He said nothing of it to the others. Some things live truer when held quiet. As the sun dipped, they reached a shelf of stone. Below, a ditch cut toward the road, steep but direct. Joel laughed once, brittle. "That's it. That's the way." Mark's face was grey from pain, but he nodded. They started down, sliding on hands and boots, shale-cutting palms. At the ditch bottom, muck stank of runoff, but when they looked left, the road glimmered through alder, no more than 100 yards away. Joel stumbled forward with a cry, half joy, half collapse. Ethan caught him and held him upright. Mark dragged his bad leg but didn't fall. Together they reached the asphalt, dark, cracked, humming with unseen traffic. Civilization. They stood there, 3 men beaten raw, and none spoke. The silence was heavy, with something more than relief. Ethan lifted his face to the low clouds. He didn't see the man again, but he felt him, still seated by the fire, still waiting, as if the circle of warmth had followed them here. The ache in his chest loosened. They were not lost anymore. They stood on the shoulder, blinking at the flat space, and the thin sound of tires far away. The road ran 2 ways, both dark. Joel smiled once, and then swayed. Mark leaned on the sapling crutch. "Right," Mark said. "Downhill. People build in bottoms." They walked, boots slapping wet grit, clouds skimmed low. The smell shifted. Less rot, more oil. Service flickered, 1 bar, then none. Ethan sent a text anyway. "Lost. On a road, West Virginia hills. Love you." The bubble spun, froze, vanished. A mile marker flashed 17. Joel touched it like proof. Hope rose and fell with every bend. No cars, no cabins, ditches, culverts, crushed cans. Mark breathed in little grunts. The ankles swelled until leather creaked. Ethan thought about cutting the boot, then left it. Wet feet would end them. A pull-off held a weathered sign, Birch Run Wildlife Management Area. Under cloudy plexiglass, a map showed a tangle of trails and a red, "You are here." "There," Joel said, finger on a line. "Forest Road 62 meets County 8 in 3 miles. 3 miles flat is 90 minutes, Mark said. This won't be flat. A metal box held a soggy register. Ethan wrote big, Ethan Lake, Mark Reed, Joel Harper, lost, heading south along road. On the next page, a week-old note read, saw 2 does and a fox. The normalcy made his throat burn. They walked on, the sky lowered. A logging truck finally roared from the grey. Ethan waved both arms from the ditch. The truck howled past. Exhaust hung sharp, then thinned. Rain came hard enough to sting. They put their backs to a rock cut and took it. Ethan thought of the man at the fire. 9 words. Enough. He kept that to himself. When it eased, they moved. A narrow bridge crossed the creek they had. Followed, brown water twisting under boards. Ethan stopped, palms on the rail, then pushed on. Mark said. If I stop long, I seize. A cattle guard rattled. Fields opened in quick shards, rough pasture, a white-wrapped bale. Dusk ran them down. Joel went to a knee. Ethan lifted him by the collar. At a bend where the hollow pinched, they found a gravel drive chained across. Beyond it, a low building sat under sycamores, dark windows, a cross on the front. Mountain View Gospel Church. A motion. Light blinked on, off on again. They stood at the chain. Mark swallowed. Feels wrong to break it. Ethan slid the hook free, stepped through, and rehooked it. On the porch, a coffee tin sat beside songbooks. The door was locked. Around back, a ring of stones lay black from years. A coal box held a few dry splits and a month-old newspaper. He built the smallest fire he knew. It caught slow, it held. They sat in a triangle, close to heat, far enough to keep sparks off sleeves. No words, only breath, wind in sycamore, and wood clicking to flame. Ethan looked at the empty dark beside the ring and felt, more than saw, a place for someone to sit. He didn't ask. He didn't demand. He let the space be what it was, an open seat, a kept promise. Far down the road, headlights turned into the hollow and began to climb. The headlights slid up the gravel like slow water. A pickup eased to a stop by the chain. Doors opened with hollow clanks. A man and a woman stepped out. Late 50s, maybe. Farm tough, coats zipped, flashlight in the man's hand. He called from the edge of the light, not unkind, not soft either. "You boys all right?" Ethan stood, palms up. "Hunters, got turned around. One ankle's bad." The man swung the beam to Mark's boot, to the sapling crutch, to Joel's hollow face, then back. Whatever decision he needed to make, he made it. He lifted the chain, waved them through. "I'm Carl Jenkins. This is my wife, Donna. We keep the church. Come on." Inside, the keys rattled, and the door gave with a dry sigh. The Mountain View Gospel Church smelled of old coffee, hymnals, pine sol, and winter coats. Donna flipped switches. The fellowship hall glowed a tired yellow. Long tables, folded chairs, a corkboard called out potlucks, and a youth car wash from last spring. "Sit," Donna said, already moving. "Carl Kettle." She was small and quick, grey hair pulled tight, voice like worn wood, plain and sturdy. She set a stack of blankets on the table. "Boots off. Let me see. That ankle." Mark tried to argue. She didn't hear. She cut his boot with kitchen shears and peeled it away. The joint rolled purple under skin. "We'll wrap it." She did, firm and careful, talking to herself. "Stupid hills will do this." Carl stood the kettle on a 2-burner stove and dug a crate. Saltines, peanut butter, instant soup. He slid open a drawer and handed Ethan a spoon. "Eat slow, or you'll get sick." They did. The first mouthful of hot chicken broth tasted like both nothing and everything. Heat followed it down. Joel tried to hide his shaking. Donna set a hand to his shoulder and left it there until the tremor eased. "You're here now," she said. "That's enough." A landline hung by the fridge. Carl called County Dispatch. He gave names, ages, a rough map of where they'd come from. "No frostbite," he said, looking at their raw hands. "One sprain. Hungry." He listened. "Copy." He hung up. "Deputy's 30 out. Clinic can take a look. You can warm here till then." They ate. Crackers with peanut butter. Each bite slow. The clock above the coat rack ticked loud. Ethan felt the room press around him like a gentle hand. The hum of a soda machine, the scuff of chairs, the relief of four walls. The fire outside popped once in the ring, patient and small. Donna poured coffee. "We pray here on Wednesdays," she said, "not as an offer but as a fact. Sometimes it's 3 of us, sometimes it's 1. Doesn't much matter. God hears the one." Ethan nodded without words. He felt the same quiet he'd felt by the creek and under the boulder lip, a sense of being seen without being put on display. He swallowed hard, set the cup down, and pressed his palms together on the table board. He did not say, "I saw him." He held it inside like a coal he wasn't ready to show. Mark leaned back, eyes closed, coffee cupped to his chest. Joel stared at the bulletin board as if it might name him. Carl sat across, elbows on knees. "Birch Run eats people," he said. "Not mean, just big." "You turned left up on that ridge, didn't you?" Ethan's head lifted. "We did." Carl grunted like that made sense. "Good." He didn't ask why. Donna tucked another blanket around Joel. "You can sleep a minute. Deputy will knock." Ethan couldn't sit still. He stepped to the back door and pushed it open. Night had thinned to a low clouded glow. The small fire in the ring had settled to an orange fist. Sycamore leaves swayed, the sound like quiet talk in a far room. He stepped down and stood a foot from the stones, palms open, letting the heat sting. The seat across from him was empty, but the ground there held a warmer patch, as if someone had just stood up and gone inside to wait. He didn't ask for another word. He didn't need a sign. He only said, out loud but soft, "Thank you." The air moved once, cool and close, brushing his cheek like a hand. Back inside, the fellowship hall felt safer than it should. Joel slept with his mouth open, a smear of peanut butter on his thumb. Mark snored. Lightly, the ankle propped. Carl rinsed mugs. Donna set the kettle back to simmer. The clock ticked on. Headlights slid across the window again and stopped. A door shut. Knuckles tapped gentle on painted wood. Ethan looked at the empty chair for an extra second, then turned toward the knock. The deputy wore a brown jacket and a face that had seen long nights. He stepped into the fellowship hall with the wet smell of the road on him and took his hat off like the room still belonged to Sunday. "Evening," he said. "I'm Deputy Aaron McCready. Dispatch said 3 hunters." "That's us," Ethan answered. He stood slower than he meant to. The warmth and food had loosened his legs in a dangerous way. "Mark's ankle is bad." McCready crouched and looked, fingers gentle around bone. "Sprain for sure, maybe more. We'll get you to Dr. Patel at the clinic." He looked up at Donna and Carl. "Thank you for opening up." Donna waved it off. "Church is for when people get lost." She wrapped Mark's ankle, with more care than any hospital could afford. "You'll need a boot." McCready eyed the 3 men again, taking in the hollow cheeks, the red around eyes, the way they flinched at small sounds. "How long?" Ethan glanced at the clock. Time had stopped belonging to him among trees. 2 days. He looked to Joel. Joel didn't trust his voice and only nodded. "Tell me where you started," the deputy said, pulling a notepad. Ethan sketched the morning, the ridge, the creek, the old fire ring. Like a rock, slipping from pocket, the other part came out before he could weigh it. "We crossed to a small fire, no camp, dry wood stacked under a slab stone, Someone had it waiting. We warmed and moved on. Macready's pencil paused. You see anyone? No, only the fire. The deputy nodded in a way that meant he had heard things before. There are trail volunteers who stash wood. Some folks leave fires banked if they know weather's turning bad. He closed the book. Sometimes it's just kindness left. Behind. He kept his eyes on Ethan's for an extra beat, and it felt like permission. Believe what you need to and still be a sane man in a hard county. The ride down canyon was slow. Carl insisted on driving, following Macready's cruiser. The night seemed bigger from the passenger seat, the headlights a narrow tunnel. Ethan watched the sycamores sweep past in white flashes. Joel fell asleep with his chin to his chest. Mark gritted his teeth around every bump. The county clinic sat at the edge of town, a low-block building with a flag snapping weakly above it. Inside, the walls were mint paint and old posters warning about tick bites and frostbite. Dr. Patel was younger than Ethan expected, hair pulled into a knot, sleeves rolled. She pressed fingers into Mark's ankle and sent him for an X-ray. You're lucky, she said when the film came back. No fracture. High sprain. She fitted a boot, printed a sheet with stretches, and told Mark to keep weight off for a week. Ethan used the lobby, phoned to tell Sarah they were safe. Her breath broke and steadied. Deputy Macready pressed a card into Ethan's hand. Tomorrow, he said. Outside, the night felt larger. Ethan kept the card like a small, stubborn flame. They kept them for observation because that is what clinics do when men come in from the woods, looking older than their years. Mark lay on a gurney with his booted ankle propped. Joel curled in a chair with a blanket over his shoulders, face gone soft with sudden sleep. Ethan couldn't sit. He walked the hall, reading the bulletin about Lyme symptoms and the sign reminding visitors to wash hands. Fluorescents buzzed. A mop leaned in a corner like a man resting. Sarah's voice had steadied on the second call. Come home, she said. Come home and eat. He heard the scrape of a chair, imagined his girl pretending not to listen. The pencil stopped above her homework. I will, he told her. He had already said the other part without saying it. I saw someone. He kept that in, his chest where words can't bruise it. Near midnight, Donna brought styrofoam cups of broth. She set one in Ethan's hands and left him with a pat on the arm that carried more blessing than speech. Carl slipped his coat over a chair and closed his eyes, chin on his chest. The deputy came back with discharge papers and a plan. I'll meet you at the church at 2 tomorrow, Macready said. If you're up to it, we'll mark where you crossed and where you camped. Folks get turned around in the same places. He said it like a farmer talking about a fence line that needs mending. Not dramatic, necessary. Ethan nodded. I'm up to it. He felt the weight of those words, not as bravado, but duty. Somebody had banked a fire and split dry sticks under stone. Somebody had waited by a circle of heat. Maybe it had been a man with kind hands. Maybe it had been more. Either way, that spot in the hills had become a place to keep. He slept in the chair and woke to dawn thinning the edges of the blinds. Mark snored once and went quiet. Joel sat up sharp, eyes wild, then settled when he saw the tiled ceiling and heard the distant bell of a monitor. They ate packets of oatmeal like kings, stirring with wooden sticks, scraping the last of it as if sweet could end the memory of cold. Before they left, Dr. Patel pressed a card into Ethan's palm. If you feel odd in the next days, confusion, headaches, come back. Dehydration plays tricks. She looked at them carefully, reading what was written on their faces. Also, she paused, choosing the right kind of kindness. You did right to keep moving. The parking lot wind cut through coats. The sky held to grey. Carl's truck door shrieked when it opened. Ethan stood a second longer than he needed, breathing the air, letting its clean bite tell him he was not under trees anymore. He put the deputy's card in his breast pocket and the doctor's in his wallet and felt like a man holding two lifelines, one for the hills, one for the town. Macready's. Cruiser nosed in at 2 sharp. Ethan stood, feeling the day gather itself. Whatever had sat by their fire, whoever had split those sticks, had set a task in him. He tightened his pack straps and nodded once. Ready. They rode with Macready as far as the gate where Forest Road 62 rose into the cut hills. Beyond that, the deputy parked and lifted a pack from the trunk that looked like it had seen longer days than most men. He handed Ethan a roll of bright flagging tape and kept one for himself. "Tie it where you wished you'd had it," he said. "On the way out and the way back, 2 trails are 2 different countries." They started up slow, Mark on crutches between Donna's walking sticks that Carl had cut and sanded smooth in the hour between lunch and the deputy's arrival. Joel walked point with the map, nose into wind, eyes sharp now that fear had released its choke. The creek, when they met it, sounded friendlier in daylight. Alder leaves flashed the silver side when the breeze turned. The churn in Ethan's chest eased. He still felt watched, but like a man on a job site watched by a foreman who wanted the house built right. They found their heel dents in the mud at the old crossing. Macready stood and listened the way men listen to engines. Head tilted, mouth closed, hands quiet. "This is where you went over," he said, not as a question. He knelt and drove a stake, tied a square of tape high and another low. "Crossing here is fine if it's low. In flood, take the upper bend." He marked that too, 100 yards above, where a fallen hemlock made a bridge. They moved upstream and came to the pocket under the hemlock, the old fire ring, the charred nail. It felt smaller by day and more serious. Ethan's gut tightened like he'd walked into someone's shop uninvited. He knelt and cleared damp ash. Under it lay a layer of dry chips, thin as fingernails, tucked beneath a flat stone to shed rain. Macready whistled, low. "Somebody knows their business," he pointed to the rock. "That's no accident." Ethan stacked 3 chips in a triangle, added a matchstick-thin twig, then another. He did not strike a flame. This was not for him now. It was for the next night that went bad. Joel added a twist of birch bark. Mark, awkward with the crutch, set a dry cone like a small crown on top. The deputy pulled a blackened coffee can from the duff. He shook it. 3 matches rattled inside, sealed in wax. He looked at Ethan. "You want to break this seal?" Ethan shook his head. "Leave it." They went on to the boulder lip. The stones were cold. Wind came off the ridge in slow breaths. He sat where he had sat and set his palms out over nothing. Macready said nothing. Donna rested a hand on Mark's shoulder and looked out across the valley. Ethan cleared his throat. "We turned left here," he said, and the words sounded small against the long shoulder of rock. "We didn't have reason. I just knew." Macready tied tape at the mouth of the notch and another band where the slope forked. "Men get bad ideas when they're cold and hungry," he said. "A mark at the right place can save a fool from his own head." On the way down, they flagged dead ends and set a small cairn at the ditch that led to the road. The work made a map out of memory. It steadied them more than food had. At the trucks, Macready held Ethan's hand a second longer than a handshake. "You were helped, and you helped back. Stay with that." Ethan glanced once more at the dark line of trees. He didn't ask for a sign. He simply felt that the man by the fire had not gone anywhere he could lose. The seat would always be there, warm as work done right, waiting for the next tired soul to sit and listen. Home did not clap or cheer when Ethan stepped through the door. It sighed. The house held the smell of laundry and last night's spaghetti. Sarah folded him in, her chin in the hollow of his shoulder, no words big enough for the size of this small thing. He had come back. His girl tried to be brave and failed, which is the best kind of failing. She hid her face in his jacket and said, muffled, "You smell like a campfire," and then forgot to pretend she didn't cry. He ate and then ate again, not for joy, but because the hunger that had been a fist opened slowly and needed to be fed like a starved dog, careful and regular. He slept hard for an hour and woke with his heart in a sprint and his hands out to a heat that wasn't there. He went to the garage, found an old pie tin, set it on a cinder block, and put 3 sticks inside, dry from the shelf. He didn't light them. He sat on the step and held his palms out anyway, feeling foolish and then not. He told Sarah pieces. The creek, the cold, the church, Donna's hands, the deputy tying flags. He told her how the ridge had opened to a road when they turned left. He didn't say the other part until late, when the house had gone quiet and dishes stood drying and their girl had flopped her arm across her face and pretended sleep in the way of children listening hard. "I saw a man," Ethan said, "by the fire. He looked at me like he'd known me 100 years. He said 9 words. He didn't repeat them. They sat with him like bread in a pocket. Sarah didn't laugh. She didn't fuss. She set her hand on his knee and left it there. 'I believe you,' she said, and that was the whole sermon Ethan needed. Work the next day felt built of softer wood. Co-workers slapped his back and told their own stories of getting turned around or stuck in snow, or losing the trail in fog. None of those stories had a man in them, but a few had a feeling, the moment something steadied them that they could not name. "You can call it what you want," his boss said over a thermos lid. "I call it mercy." At night, Ethan lit a small fire in the yard because the sky had cleared, and the cold was honest for once. He sat in a camp chair and listened to traffic far off and a dog 2 houses down barking at shadows. He kept the flames low and the wood small. A second. Chair sat opposite him, empty and yet not. He fought the urge to stare at it the way a boy looks too hard at a dark doorway. Instead, he watched the coals and thought about nails black as crow bones and birch bark twisted into birds. Joel texted late, "Can't sleep. I keep hearing the creak." Ethan wrote back, "Me too, it's okay. It's just water now." Mark sent a picture of his boot and a pair of crutches with a caption, "Donna says I'll preach on slowing down if I don't sit." They promised coffee at the church in a week. Ethan let the fire go to a bed of light and then to dark. Before he kicked ash over it, he held his hands out one more time, not to a miracle but to a memory turned into a tool. 2 Saturdays later, Ethan drove back into the hills with a bag of dry sticks, a coil of waxed matches in a jar, and a thermos of coffee. He didn't make a show of it. He didn't tell many people. Sarah kissed his cheek at the door and said, "Go on," like she was sending him to the hardware store. The road up looked the same, ruts and all, but the fear in him had calmed to something else, a purpose that didn't need anyone to clap for it. The church was quiet when he parked. He set the jar in the coffee tin by the ring and stacked a few split pine pieces under the slabstone out back. He wrote a small note on index card, "If you're cold, there's dry here. If you're lost, sit and breathe. When the light goes grey, turn left, not right." He slid it under the rocks without deciding why those words belonged to more than his one night. At the creek crossing, the flags they'd tied snapped. He followed them up to the hemlock pocket and checked the old ring. The wax seal on the match can was unbroken, the chips were dry. He added 4 more and a twist of bark, and felt silly and then steady. Halfway to the boulder lip, he heard brush crack a canyon over. "Hello," a voice called, tight as wire. "Anyone there?" Ethan answered and waited. A man in camo came through alder, face pale, bow unstrung. "I'm Tom," he said without breath. "Been walking since morning, can't find the truck." He kept glancing past Ethan as if the trees held judgment. "Phone's dead." Ethan pointed downslope. "There's a notch ahead. You can see road from there on a clear day. Flags will get you to a ditch that meets asphalt. You thirsty?" He handed over his bottle and watched the man drink like he'd been holding back as a test of pride. Tom wiped his mouth. "I prayed," he said. Not sure if that was allowed to be. Said out loud. "Felt stupid, then less stupid." "Not stupid," Ethan said. They walked together to the notch. The valley opened like a picture. "Turn left here," Ethan said, palm flat, feeling the old words vibrate in him the way a good tool hums when you set it right. "Not right." Tom laughed once, then sobered. "You sound like somebody told you that the hard way." "Somebody did." Ethan didn't say who. He didn't need Tom to carry that with his fear. "Follow the flags. There's a church down there. If you make it by dusk, they'll feed you." He thought of cornbread and the clean, honest faces in the fellowship hall. "Tell Carl hello." Tom hesitated. "What about you?" "I have a thing to do." Ethan gestured back toward the old ring, the slab, the chips. Tom nodded like that made sense between men with no need to explain. He moved off down the flagged line, boots careful, shoulders looser. Alone again, Ethan climbed to the boulder lip and sat. Wind shouldered past him. He built a tiny fire, 3 sticks, 1 curl, a match, and waited until the flame steadied and the sound of it softened. He didn't talk. He didn't need a show. He filled a cup from the thermos, held it out toward the empty seat, and then drank. For a while, the only sound was flame and wind and far water. Then, so quiet it could have been a thought, something like a breath moved beside him, and the fire eased into a warmer tone. "I'll keep it," he said. The coals glowed like a kept promise. They met at the church. The next week, for coffee that tasted like work and a pot of stew, Donna kept warm on low. Carl leaned against the sink, hands black at the creases from years of fixing things. A few folks from the congregation dropped in and out without fussing, as if tired men turning whole again at a table was ordinary. Mark moved better in the boot and told the part about slipping on clay in a way that made people laugh without losing respect. Joel spoke less. When he did, it was to say, "There was a smell of smoke where there shouldn't have been. It kept us from quitting." No one joked at that. Carl nodded like he knew smoke and what it could mean in a hard night. Ethan held the other thing until the bowls were scraped and the room less full. He looked at Donna's hands wrapped around her mug and at the cross above a faded bulletin for a fish fry. "I saw a man," he said. He told the plainest version he could bear. No flourish, no sell. He sat by the fire like he was waiting for me to wake up. He told me to turn left. He stopped there. His chest hurt, a good hurt like lungs filling deep after a long shallow. Donna didn't blink. "Sometimes he waits with us," she said. "Sometimes he walks ahead. Either way, he ain't in a hurry." She said it the way some folks say the weather. Observation, not argument. Carl set down his mug. "We've had folks say they felt looked after. Had a logger swear a man in a brown coat stood by his truck when it went off the grade and told him to climb out slow." He shrugged. He climbed. That's what mattered. Dr. Patel stopped by on her way home, tired and smiling. She checked Mark's ankle and listened to this talk without rolling her eyes. "Brains under stress will grab at meaning," she said kindly, "and sometimes they grab true. Science doesn't fight with mercy." She patted Ethan's shoulder with a doctor's permission. "Whatever you saw, it sent you the right way." They carried out a box of new flagging tape and a bag of nails. Carl had built small signs. In his shop, arrows with reflective paint, each one routed clean and sealed. They planned a Saturday to post them, where the deputy's map had marked hard turns. The church youth offered to haul trash from pull-offs. Donna folded matches in wax for the old ring. It felt less like a story now and more like a crew forming up at daybreak, each person grabbing a tool. Before they left, they stepped out to the fire ring. The ash was cold. Ethan stacked 3 sticks and stopped, letting the shape be a promise he didn't have to keep alone. Joel set a pine cone on top again, a habit now. Mark, stubborn as ever, bent and tucked the note Ethan had left deeper under the slab. The hills kept their quiet counsel. Not all rescues happen fast. Some last years. You stay beside the heat and wait until people can walk. He could do that. It wasn't heroic. It was steady. It was enough. Winter settled in, clean and unforgiving. The hills took on the color of steel. Workdays went back to their shapes, and still the night held a little more room than before. Ethan woke once at 3 in the morning and could not lie still. He put on boots and a coat over pajama pants and stepped outside into air that grabbed the throat. Stars were thin behind a high veil. The town was a low hum. Somewhere a plow scraped. He set 3 sticks in the backyard pit and lit them. The flame rose like it always does when dry wood says yes. He kept it small so it would not burn away the quiet. He pulled 2 chairs close. One for him, one for the space that had kept him. He sat and let the sting of heat bring his hands back to life. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer the right words. He watched the fire do what fire has always done for tired men, draw a border against the dark and make a place where the heart can stop bracing. He let memory walk through. Joel's shaking hands, Mark's face set against pain, Donna cutting a boot with kitchen shears, Carl's chain lifted for strangers, Macready's card pressed. Into his palm, Dr. Patel's voice steady and kind. He thought of Tom. Somewhere on a different ridge, maybe, telling his own version some night at a kitchen table. He thought of the old ring under the hemlock and the matches sealed in wax, waiting. He pictured that seat up there by the slabstone, and the one by the boulder lip, and the one beside this backyard pit, and knew they were all the same seat. Snow began in a dry sift, quiet as breath. It melted when it hit the rim of the pit and held where it found shade. Ethan leaned forward, fed a curl to the coals, and felt the same pull he had felt on the ridge, a rope tied to his ribs and drawn not hard, just sure. He smiled at the foolishness of it and at the truth. "I know," he said, as if to someone you can't see across a table but whose hands you know by the scars. "I'll stay until morning." Inside the house, a light clicked on. Sarah watched him through the window for a long second, then raised 2 fingers in a small salute and turned off the lamp. The street stayed empty. The night did not crack with glory. The flame settled to a low song. When the fire went to coals, he didn't crush it. He banked it like he had been taught. He left a small heat there under ash, so that if he wandered back toward dawn, the circle would greet him ready. He stood, felt his knees argue, and then paused with his palm open over the opposite chair. It held a little warmth, the kind that stays 10 minutes after a friend leaves. Inside again, his girl had drawn a picture in crayon on the counter, 3 stick figures by a tiny fire, and a 4th shape, simple and certain, seated. Under it, she had written in the hard letters of learning, "He waits." Ethan set his hand on the paper like a man sealing a promise. He did not need more proof than this. He went back to bed with the smell of smoke in his hair and the ache in his legs like old friends. He closed his eyes and saw a ridge, a creek, a narrow notch, and a man sitting by a small circle of flame waiting for him to wake. When the light goes grey, he would turn left again. That would be enough. That would be the way home.